Good morning. It's Pop again, Dennis Murray. Today is Popcast 67, and it's called Nature's Wisdom, Part 17. Yesterday we talked about the problem of the big man and the slacker, and Einstein and his fears about the cult of personality. Today I've got some more examples in the general subject of looking at things in a new light. So things take on a new light when you realize that we actually thrive uh, only when we see our problems about social arrangement as common problems rather than as you're the problem or you're the problem. Um, then we have the benefit of working together, which gives us a huge emotional lift. And it also is the case that we can't ever solve the problems; they always persist. The As we begin to discover with things like the slacker and the big man, they never go away. They're always there because they're built into human nature. So the biggest challenge we humans face is dealing with each other. The rest of it, oddly enough, isn't all that difficult. So we can manipulate nature. We can deal with wild beasts. Thus far, we've been relatively successful with the terrors that weather can inflict. Um, but the real challenge always, and the real source of fright is each other. It's pretty hard to deal with people in large numbers because we're each so complicated. So, dealing with each other is the main task of life. And as a result, making social arrangements is the main starting point for this incredible task. But if we are able to see that social arrangements are a common problem that's never going to go away, then when we begin to address it, we automatically have achieved a sense of connection to each other, a sense of working on problems together. And it's a very wonderful feeling. It's also the key to thriving as a species. Um, but it means that the great divide ends as soon as you see that you're working on the problems of social arrangement together. Um, and my whole starting point was, is there some way to get us out of the great divide? And I believe there is. And I believe that I have shed some light on how that would work in theory. Then the practice is a lot harder. And so, it's like the centipede with athlete's foot. The doctors had a long conference and then told him he should become a rabbit and solve 98% of his problem. Okay, that was a silly joke from like fifth grade, but still, you see the point that there are some problems that we have to accept aren't solvable. But if we accept them as common problems, then the Great Divide ends and we go forward with a lot different emotional sense for ourselves of how we're living and a lot increased chance of doing well enough in this whole life business of living in relation to each other. So, okay, so that was all set up. So I've covered that a lot of times. I don't know why I cover it each time, but it just seems like it's so important to remember the context in which things are advanced. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about Joe versus Bernie again. And I know I talked about it a month or so ago, but once again, it fits here. So, Joe's an example of one way of approaching common problems, and Bernie's an example of another way. And that's why I want to bring it back up because it fits in the context of all the possible different approaches to common problems. Um, Joe's approach is a lot more commonsensical, a lot more accepting of compromises. And Bernie's approach is purity of essence. Uh, for Bernie, there's only one way, and it's the way of high principle, and everything has to fit within that principle. And you can make a really good argument for the wisdom of both approaches. Um, both are deeply rooted in your personality, so that it may not be easy for Bernie ever to come to accept something less than purity in the public arena. He might just not be able to vote for a bill that isn't pure. I don't know. I don't know his voting record. Um, but it would be an enormous psychological event for him to gain an appreciation that there is some credibility to another point of view. And in all honesty, I don't know enough about Bernie or Joe to, get too deeply into what they've done or not done or what they might do or et cetera. I'm just using them as an example that um, here's two very different approaches from two men of quality, two men of integrity. Uh, and Let's look a little bit further into it to this point of view. Could there be integrity in compromise? That's the real question. Bernie would answer no. Um, and you could see in the last debate he had with Joe that he kept bringing up instances where Joe was less than perfect, was less than pure in the extreme liberalism that approaches socialism that Bernie espouses. Um, and you could see that Joe didn't really know how to say to Bernie, or to the public, look, Bernie and I disagree. I mean, he's a purist and I'm a practical guy. I have integrity, though I think Bernie would be willing to admit I have integrity. But as far as Bernie goes, these are serious failings on my part when I have not followed the pure line that Bernie wants everybody to follow. I just don't think you can run a country that way. And that's the whole point. There, there seems to be integrity in compromise because the, the, the starting point that Jung's wisdom gave us was you have to accept differences before you can deal with them. So there are good people who have very different approaches to how one lives the gift of each other, to how one takes a stance towards our common problems, assuming that a whole bunch of people decide that we'll see the problems as common and the great divide goes away. There's still quite a bit of difference of opinion, and that's never going to go away. So the question is there only one way? And I think the answer to that is that wisdom would indicate probably not. Um, there might be one way for you in your heart of hearts, but if you're accepting of people's right to be different, to start with the same intuitions, move towards the gift of each other, and then disagree with you about how one lives the gift of each other, if you're accepting of that, then I don't see how you can insist that they have to agree to do everything on your terms, or that you've somehow sacrificed your substance of your purity of heart if you agree to do some things on their terms. So, and I think that's a very important point. You're not going to end the divide until you see the integrity of the middle. And that applies the other way as well. I mean, I've just talked about Joe and Bernie, but there were, let's ignore the current moment in the Republican Party, but there were in the past a lot of different opinions among Republicans There were centrist Republicans. There were very right wing Republicans, and there was a whole host of people in between. Um, so let's assume that that's the situation that will develop in the future when uh, um, the current circumstances have changed a bit. Um, and so again, the Republicans are going to have the same argument. Uh, a Tea Party people or someone like Bernie, they insist on, pretty much an extreme point of view with no room for compromise. And I gather that it largely their opinion that compromise is for people of no moral character. Um, so, that's the first and hardest thing to deal with. You have to establish the integrity of compromise. And you establish that by seeing that uh, our individuality makes us have very different opinions about how we live the gift of each other, and that wisdom makes us respect the other guy's approach as well as we ask him to respect ours. So that compromise is a matter of high integrity because it involves a critical factor for living the gift of each other, and that is respecting the other guy's right to have fundamental differences from us on how we are supposed to live the gift of each other. So once you start looking at things in terms of how can we end the divide, well, part of it is we see the problems as common problems to face together, but we can't do that if we don't see the integrity of the center. And so I'm going to give some further examples. So the other day there was on Facebook, and I gather elsewhere in the media, a short clip of a young woman uh, who was a protester, and apparently in D.C., I believe. In all honesty, I didn't pay close attention to the clip. And she was yelling at some uh, black police officers and calling them racist. And someone, I don't know who, a cameraman or just another protester with a cell phone, uh, asked her, the person being off camera, as far as I could tell, asked her if she saw the irony in a white girl yelling at black people and about being racist. And she said no, that they were racist because they were part of the system and the system was racist. Now, my, how does this fit in with what we're talking about? Because I don't have any desire to go through all the items that appear in Facebook and take them apart one by one. But this one seemed like uh, a good teaching point because while I have a lot of sympathy with the girl for reasons I'm going to give in a moment, I also, as a younger person, was much more like Bernie than Joe. And I could tell you a number of stories where I, felt that um, to live Christianity called on you to be extremely purist in your approach, and there was little room for compromise. So I have a good deal of respect for the girl because she's living the uncompromising stance that she's taken, uh, and she's screaming from her heart and her soul. Um, it's just and it isn't just the point that as I aged and had certain experiences, I moved away from that stance, and I'm much closer to Joe than Bernie at this point in my approach to life. That isn't the key here. I mean, the girl's not wrong because she started where I started and hasn't yet moved away from it. That I'm not saying she's wrong at all. I want to point out something that is related to our discussion about the integrity of the center. So, what was going on there was a young person like Bernie felt that um, only perfect intellectual purity was acceptable. And she had further concluded that the system is racist. Well, so we're going to talk about that for a minute, and then she was undeterred in her purity stance by the fact that the people she was calling racist were black people who have had more than their fair share of the experience of living while black in the modern world. And pardon me, that was my notice to take my pills for the morning, but I already took them. It's okay. Um, the uh, so the key is she has rejected compromise, and she has categorically, stated that the system is racist because it includes aspects of racism. That's the part I want to talk about. How could there be a system that didn't have aspects of racism? Since we all have some racism in our hearts, we all are very imperfect in this regard. Uh, Black or white, we have at times had the experience of very negative words in our hearts and minds addressed towards somebody of a different color, or in I think in most cases somebody of her own skin color. You can you can consider that the person who says I've never had a thought that was negative based on the skin color of the person I'm talking to or observing in action, or who I'm deciding how I will respond to. This person has not been very honest and forthcoming to themselves, or they've lived a very short time. Um, and it's not to say, oh well, it's perfectly fine. We're all racist. That's good. Uh, you can accept that racism is a fact of human nature, and then you can begin to go forward wisely about it. So the first thing you do is say, well, okay, so my choice is, do I wallow in it, or do I regret it and not condemn myself for it, because you're entitled to your own forgiveness just like everybody else is. But do I regret it, and do I work to downplay its hold on me? Do I exercise restraint in such matters? And I think that that's the real difference. So that to think that there could be a system that would include the entire social arrangements concerning government and all at state, local, and federal, and all the people who participate in it in one function or another, elected officials, appointed officials with very high roles, judges, um, and all the diplomats and bureaucrats, and then all the scientists who work for the government, all the teachers in public schools, all of the police and fire, all of the trash collectors, and everybody else you can think of. There's architects, there's surveyors, there's lawyers, um, there's everybody, there's cooks, there's bottle washers, there's everybody you can think of that works in some part of the system. And we create the social arrangements, and included in the social arrangements is that we pay taxes that are used to hire people to do things that need to be done on the behalf of the community. So we are part of the system, and starting with denying that I'm not part of the system is an evil creation that I hate and want to destroy. This is the person who needs to go see somebody. They got some problems. This is just not a healthy point of view. There's no wisdom there at all. You're starting by denying realities, and you're starting by disassociating yourself from things from which you're intimately associated. It's your community as much as my community. If you don't like the way the community is operating, you're part of the community that you don't like how it's operating. You can't say, I'm not part of that community. I hate them and I want to destroy them if I can't change them. This is not how life is. And I don't care if you're Bernie or you're the girl, it's not going to work. It's not wise, and it's not accepting of what he is. And you don't get wisdom until you begin with accepting. And so that's my point. But it's also part of us that there will be those people of good heart and good soul who can't see compromise, who can't see it as a matter of integrity, and and that's the real issue. What went on with the girl yelling at the black policeman was she just couldn't accept what must be accepted, that the system is us and we're all sullied, we're all sinners, we all have things that we're ashamed of, and being racist is pretty much normal. There are those souls who have very, very little of that in them. My grandkids are that way, and it's just a delight to see. My kids are that way, and my wife and I came up from a different world, but early on we found ourselves feeling like we needed to do things to reduce the racism in our own selves, in our own lives, and we made some progress. That's all you get out of life. You have to start with trying to accept, and then you try to make some progress on yourself, on the society. This, that's that's what you get. That's how you earn a sense of a well-lived life. So for the girl yelling at the police, my hope is that experiences will help her see that accepting that she's part of the system is a good starting point, and that accepting that just as she's imperfect, so is the system, and and that accepting imperfection is wisdom, and then looking to see what can actually be done and how best to do it. That's what follows. So I have more stories, but there's tomorrow, and we'll say goodbye for today. Take care. Bye bye.